You ready, Amy?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Cool. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this is our final webinar for monthly webinars. We transition into the quarterly webinars. So I'm excited to wrap us up. My name is Julius Lockhart. I'm the Floodplain Management Specialist for the state of Tennessee. So I work closely with Amy's office on anything NFIP related, which is the National Flood Insurance Program. So we're talking about regulations, permitting, administrative procedures, workshops, technical assistance, mapping. If it has floodplain management involved with it, Amy and I are here to support all 402 communities that's participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. I'm always excited to conduct, whether it's in person or virtual training, the opportunity to speak with you guys and explain various technical topics or provide technical assistance on various among the topics as it pertains to the floodplain program. So today's topic is substantial damage administrative procedures, better known as SDAP workshop overview. So today's, we're not going to be too long, maybe about an hour long. This presentation is kind of going to be a prelude to our August conference. That's August 14th through the 16th in Franklin, Tennessee. I'm going to kind of go a little bit more details at the conference. So definitely that's a plug for everyone on the call to come up to the conference in August. Amy, if you could drop the link for folks to register for the conference coming up in August, because we want to make sure we have a great attendance. And if you have an open mic, if you could mute your mic. Amy, if you could, we got an open mic on the call. So if you want to mute, or whoever has an open line, if you could mute yourself, would be greatly appreciated. The line is still open.
Okay.
Someone has an open line. If you could mute your line. Thank you. All right, cool. Thanks. So, so the conference coming up in August, so the 14th through the 16th. So Amy, if you could drop the link in the chat for everyone to go ahead and register for the conference. Looking forward to being at the conference for the first time. Being the lead for Tennessee, unfortunately, due to a travel conflict, I couldn't attend last year, so I'm excited to attend this year. All right, we got an open line, guys. If you have an open line, can you please mute your phone so we don't have any background noise? Thank you. Much appreciated. So the conference will be in August. All right, we still have an open line. So whoever has an open line, can you please mute your line, please? All right, Amy, I think we still have some open lines. So you just want to just go through the participant list, and if you have any open microphones, just mute it. All right. Okay. Can everyone hear me correctly?
Yes.
Give me a thumbs up.
Got you.
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right. So if you have an open mic, mute yourself. Just want to make sure everyone could hear me properly. So thank you if you're not hearing me. Just want to make sure everyone's hearing me correctly. So I'm just going to recap. So today's topic is substantial damage administrative procedures as that workshop overview. My name is Julius Lockhart. I'm the lead floodplain management specialist for the state of Tennessee. I work closely with Amy's office on everything floodplain related. So whether that's procedures, technical assistance, workshops, trainings, mapping, you name it. If it has floodplain related to it, Amy and I are involved with it to ensure that all 402 communities that's participating in the National Flood Insurance Program in the state of Tennessee is doing what it's supposed to do when it comes to floodplain compliance. So one of the biggest issues that we deal with is substantial damage. So today's monthly webinar is to talk about a new workshop that FEMA has been working on for a number of years now. And we're finally at the stage now where we're able to deliver the workshops in conjunction with our state NFIP offices. So today we're going to talk about what that workshop looks like and what it means for our communities in Tennessee. I'm also going to go more into details at the upcoming conference in August 14th through 16th. So if you haven't registered for the conference, please register for the conference. Looking forward to seeing all you guys in person, getting out there, networking, talking to you guys, hearing from you guys in terms of floodplain management and how Amy and I could continue to provide great customer service and great technical assistance to all you guys. So unfortunately, last year I couldn't attend due to a schedule conflict. So I'm excited to be here for attend the conference for the first time coming up. So today we're going to go over the SDAP workshop, kind of let you guys know what it is and how it's going to help you guys moving forward with substantial damage. If you have any questions, drop it into the chat box or unmute yourself and raise your hands, and we'll be able to answer your questions. All right, so let's get going. I got like multiple screens. All right, so presentation objectives. So what is the SDAP program? So those are the kind of questions we're going to be going over in terms of how does it apply to our NFIP communities in Tennessee. So what is the SDAP program? What do communities get from participating in the SDAP workshop? How does the SDAP toolkit help the regions and the states offer the program? So what does Amy and I have to do in order to provide the workshop to our communities in Tennessee? And what is the next step for the SDAP process? Once we get the workshop underway, how do you guys get involved with it? So the SDAP toolkit is officially ready to launch. We have spent, I think, the last couple of years, FEMA headquarters, along with the 10 FEMA regions, including Region 4 here in Atlanta and our headquarters in DC, working on trying to come up with pilots. So we got to test out the workshop in other communities to kind of get the feedback from the state and also local communities that we identified to be part of the pilot program to give us good feedback. So when we're ready now to launch the workshop instead of Tennessee and Alabama, Georgia, Florida, the Carolinas, Kentucky, Mississippi, Alabama, that we are ready to go with the workshop. So today's presentation is kind of let you guys know, hey, this workshop is in the works. It is coming to Tennessee. It won't be happening this year. It will happen sometime early next year, but we just want to lay the foundation. So in that way, we could start reaching out to communities and say, hey, would you be interested in participating in this workshop as we get going to create substantial damage plans for communities? So what is substantial damage administrative procedures? The SDAP program. So the challenge. So this is a challenge that we see not just in Tennessee, but across the United States when it comes to the National Flood Insurance Program, when it comes to substantial damage, when it comes to events in the community, whether that's a flooding event, a tornado, an earthquake, a hurricane. So communities are not prepared to administer substantial improvement or substantial damage at any scale after disasters. Many communities have at least some procedures, but they're not written down or they compile in one place, resulting in inconsistency, ineffective enforcement of local substantial improvement, substantial damage provisions at the moment when they're most meaningful. So basically it's saying that a lot of our communities are just not prepared when it comes to doing substantial damage. Whenever there's an event in the community, whether that's an earthquake, flooding, hurricane, and it causes damages to properties that's located in the special flood hazard area, so that 1% annual chance. So when you look at your flood insurance rate maps, your firm, and you see that candy cane area, that's your floodway, you see the blue area, your special flood hazard area, whether that's your candy cane, your zone A without base flood elevations, or your zone AE with base flood elevations, that's your special flood hazard area. If you have properties that's located within that special flood hazard area, as a local official, you have to go out there after every event and assess those buildings and determine are they substantially damaged or not. A lot of communities are not doing substantial damage. They don't have procedures. They tend to throw their hands up because they're unfamiliar with the process of what they have to do to make those determinations to notify a property owner, is that building substantial damage or not? Not just when there's a presidential declared disaster. Whenever there's an event in the community, regardless if there's a presidential disaster declaration or not, local officials have to go out and assess those buildings and make a determination. So the goal of the substantial damage administrative procedures as that program is to help communities to create a central plan for all the processes and procedures. So when a disaster strike, whether it's a big disaster, a small event, whether it gets to a presidential disaster declaration or not, they have the procedures in place to be readily to scale that up. So if it's a small event where it's 100 homes, or maybe it's 1,000 homes that's impacted, when you look at both residential, non-residential, they have a procedure in place that they could scale up depending on the magnitude of the event and have those processes and procedures for, hey, how many staff do we have? Is our staff trained on substantial damage? Are they trained on floodplain compliance? Are they trained on the permitting procedures? Do they know how to go out there and assess those buildings and make those determinations? Do they know how to use a substantial damage estimator tool? Do they know all those different things in order to help the community build back stronger, more efficiently, and in compliance with the NFIP program? So that's the goal of the SDAP program, is to get from a point where we are reacting to every event to not being proactive, because we have plans in place and say, hey, if we have an event, this is what we're going to do when it comes to substantial damage. All right, someone has an open mic, so if you want to mute yourself, go ahead and mute yourself. So the SDAP solution is using the SDAP plan, the substantial administrative plan template, as the foundation of the experience. Flood-prone communities can be shepherded through a process where they assess, train, and provide technical assistance, resulting in a complete substantial damage administrative plan that they can use whenever a disaster happens, and they could update over time. So it's going to be a living document that every time you have an event, you could go back and say, okay, what worked well, what did not work well, where can we make improvements? This is a document that the community will have as part of the floodplain management program. So that's the goal and the solution to the challenges that we have with communities that are struggling with substantial damage. They don't have procedures written down. Everything is all institutional knowledge. And then when that local official departs that office, or they get a new job, they retire, they move on, they leave with all that institutional knowledge. So we want to be able to have communities to have substantial damage plans written down and says, hey, this is how we're going to do substantial damage in our community. Hey, we have a freeboard requirement. We're going to make sure when it comes to the permitting and the rebuilding that folks know, hey, they have to build to the basement elevation plus that 1 foot or 2 foot of freeboard that's in your regulations. Or, hey, this is what we're going to do if there's ever federal funding and it's a presidential declared, hey, what is there funding available that we can apply to, which I'm going to talk about on the DR 1206, where now if there is a federally declared disaster, communities can now be reimbursed for doing substantial damage. So having all that stuff already built into your plan, now you have procedures and steps to ensure that your community rebuilds stronger, faster, and more resilient, because we know wherever it rains, it can flood, and we know that events are getting a lot more worse with things that's happening in our community. So we want our communities to be proactive. When I came to Tennessee and when I first met Amy, I said, one thing we have to do is kind of change the tides of how we do floodplain management in the state of Tennessee. Instead of reacting to every event that happens, let's be more proactive. Let's kind of get ahead of a lot of these things that we could put procedures in place, get our local officials trained up in substantial damage. Let's get them familiar with the regulations. Let them get familiar with workshops and training. So in that way, whenever something happens, our communities are a lot better prepared versus reacting to every single event that happens in the community. So I bring up disaster 1909. So many of you guys, I wasn't here at that time when this disaster happened in 2010. So this is DR 1909. So this was the big disaster that happened, 13 years ago, that impacted literally half the state of Tennessee. So if you could look at this disaster declaration, you could see literally half the state of Tennessee was declared for the federal disaster declaration for both individual and public assistance. Now with this event, I think this was a flooding event, if I'm correct, Amy Miller, this was a flooding event in the 2010 disaster, correct?
Yes.
And if I ask many of you guys on this call, did you do substantial damage after the event? Did you go out there and look at those buildings in the special flood hazard area, and did you make substantial determinations? Did you provide those notifications to property owners? Can anyone say, just raise their hand and say how many communities you think went out and did substantial damage? So we may have a few communities, but the majority of the times, a lot of communities are not doing substantial damage. And this is not just an issue in Tennessee. This is an issue across all 24,000 NFIP communities. A lot of our bigger communities, they go out and do it, but a lot of our small communities are not doing substantial damage. They throw their hands up, says, hey, we're just not gonna do it. Or they're just not familiar with how to go about doing substantial damage to make those determinations. So I point out to show you that, hey, this is part of being an NFIP program, that you have to go out and assess those buildings, whether it's declared or not declared. As a local official, that's part of being the National Flood Insurance Program and is built into your regulations, is going out there and assessing those buildings for substantial damage. So this is the 2010 flooding disaster declaration. The next one is 4609. So this was the most recent one. So this was the last big disaster we had in Tennessee that impacted Humphreys, Dickinson, Houston, Hickman County. That was the Waverly flooding, where we lost 22 lives from that flooding. So that was the last big disaster that got a lot of public notice, got a lot of media attention because of the loss of lives and the impact on the city of Waverly and the surrounding areas. If you talk to Larry Legere from the Floodplain Administrator from Waverly, he would say he was overwhelmed. It was a lot. You had a lot of buildings, you had a lot of damages, and he had to go out there and assess those buildings and make a determination. So before people could start rebuilding, he had to go out and assess those buildings and say, hey, this building, based on the cost of the damages divided by the pre-market value, that structure triggered substantial damage because the percentage, if it equals or greater than 50%, that structure is deemed substantially damaged. So every structure that triggered substantial damage had to be provided notification so that homeowner knows, hey, before you start doing any rebuilding, any repairs, one, you have to come get a permit. One, you're building substantial damage, so now you have to rebuild your structure into full compliance with the current floodplain regulations for that community. So if your building wasn't built to, let's say, base load elevation plus that 1 foot of requirement, now with the repair, that structure has to be elevated to the base load elevation plus that freeboard requirement for the city. So being out there and going out there and make those determinations makes a big difference in terms of making sure that our communities rebuild safer and stronger. So events going to happen. We know it rains, it's going to flood, whether it's in the spring, whether it's in the summertime. We know that events going to take place. So what can we do as local officials, as local communities, to be better prepared for those events? Do we have the training? Do we have the technical knowledge? Do we reach out to the state? Do we reach out to FEMA for assistance in blue sky? Whenever there's an event, you get all the attention, you get all the stuff that you probably swept under the rug and say, hey, we ain't gonna think about this stuff because right now it's not a priority. Guess what? With substantial damage, it has big implications for communities, because if you're not doing these things, that community could potentially be put on probation or suspension from the NFIP program. So flood insurance, disaster assistance, all these things goes away for community is kicked out of the NFIP program. So one thing that Amy and I really stressed on is the importance of compliance, whether we do that through community assistance visits, community assistance contacts, workshops. We do L2 Center Freeze just the other day in Chattanooga. We do the monthly webinars. We're going to keep on talking about compliance and how we could help you guys to remain in compliance with NFIP program. We have office hours every Monday. Reach out to us, say, hey, Julius, we need a training. Our local officials are not familiar with floodplain regulations. Our building guys are not familiar with it. We are here to support you guys. And one of the big things I stress about is doing substantial damage. So with this process that we are working forward with this workshop is now to help our communities be able to do substantial damage and having a plan in place that says, hey, this is how, if an event happens in community, this is our procedures, this is how we're going to respond to it, and this is how we're going to make sure that our communities remain in compliance with the community adopted regulations, as well as being in the National Flood Insurance Program. So what can you experience from the SDAP program? So as a local community, we have kind of a structure in terms of going through it from start to finish. So the first step is preparing to participate in the SDAP program. So basically, we're going to reach out to communities and say, hey, all 402 communities, are you interested in participating in this workshop? would you like to attend this workshop? Because one, you don't have any procedures, you're unfamiliar, you're probably brand new to floodplain management, you're the new local floodplain administrator, you just completely brand new floodplain management, you got thrown into it, somebody said, hey, you're the new floodplain administrator, you had recent events in your community, whether that was disaster declared or non-disaster declared, and you just need help in terms of, hey, we just have to have some procedures in place. So we're gonna reach out to communities and kind of get a interest, kind of gauge to see how many communities will be interested in participating in this workshop. And then once we have figured out the communities that's gonna participate, we will reach out to you guys and say, hey, you have been invited to attend this workshop. The next part we move into, you're gonna have to fill out a document beforehand because we want to know what do you have in place currently. Do you have no procedures? Do you have semi-procedures? Or do you have procedures in place, but you're looking to improve it or you're looking to add new stuff to it because you had an event recently and you were able to determine that, hey, we have some gaps in our floodplain management program when it comes to substantial damage. So we want to address those gaps and strengthen our program so community responds better. So you complete the SDAT plan template, you're gonna fill out a pre-workshop survey, and that kind of helps us to kind of know the different tracks. So the workshop is gonna have two different tracks. One's gonna be your beginner track versus your experience track. So what that means is that when Amy and I do get around to scheduling the workshops and inviting communities, when you fill out the pre-workshop survey, it's going to help us to identify what track we should put our communities in, because we're going to try to get multiple communities in within one workshop. So we may start off with maybe 4 or 5 communities at the time, and then we may increase it over time. But the goal is with this SDAT workshop is to get communities that falls into like the beginner track. You're brand new, you don't have no procedures, you're going to be in one track. So that way, when we do the workshop, every community that falls in that same category in terms of not having a lot of experience, not having any procedures in place, they will get one version of the workshop versus experienced communities who have been doing substantial damage longer. They have procedures in place. They may be in the community rating system. They're a little bit more advanced with resources and capability. We want to put them in the experience track because they're going to be asking different questions. They may be further along in their process versus a beginner community. So in order to make sure that we have the conversation that to have a beginner community is going to be different than we have with an experienced community that has been doing substantial damage for a little bit longer. So we'll be able to identify which communities will go in which track, whether it's a beginner track versus the experienced track. And then you fill out the template to kind of let us know what do you have or not have in place. So then once we figure that out, once we figure out the communities that's going to be attending, what track they're going to be, whether they're in the beginner track or the experience track, we then going to invite you to attend the workshop. So at the workshop is where you're going to come. So whether it's you plus any other local officials you want to invite from your office, you're going to come, whether it's an in-person or virtual. It will depend on how many communities we have and depending on their geographic location. If it's feasible to have an in-person versus virtual, those are the things that as Amy and I get with the planning and start figuring out all the details, we'll let you guys know. Ideally, we're trying to get into a lot more in-person workshops because I feel like you do get a better experience with the in-person workshops because you can walk around the room, kind of engage with everybody. Virtual kind of makes it a little bit difficult at times. People tend to not always pay attention versus in-person training. So once we have figured out the communities, the location, we're going to invite you guys. You guys are going to come with all your materials, if you have procedures, your regulations, and we're going to sit down and we're going to have a workshop. So the workshop, we're going to go over what your plan is, all the different parts of the substantial damage plan, with the goal at the end of the goal is that you will have a draft administrative procedures. Having that draft kind of say, hey, you're going to go back after the workshop, you're going to sit down, talk with it internally amongst your staff, you're going to send it back to us, we're going to review it and provide you feedback. Once we have gone through the feedback process and everything looks good and you say, hey, everything is good, then now you're going to have your official administrative procedures plan that now you could utilize for whatever event happens in your community. So you finalize your plan, and then you utilize your plan whenever you have an event. And remember, It's not just for federal declared disasters. It's for any event that happens in the community. There's a gas explosion, there's a fire, there's a spring flooding, whatever causes damages and obstructions in the special flood hazard area, you have to go out and assess it for substantial damage. And then over time, because it's a living document, you could always go back and make changes. The plan is for you, for the community. You write the plan based on your capability, your resources for the community. So no two communities are going to have the same plan because no two community has the same amount of resources, experience, knowledge. So the plan is designed for it to be unique to your particular community. So for the city of Nashville, they will have a plan. The city of Union City, they will have a plan. So your plan will be based on what you have came up with during the workshop when you sat down with Amy and I and the other state or FEMA specialists that's in the workshop, and we talk about the plan and we walk you through to say, hey, okay, what is in your regulations? Do you have high standards? How many people are trained on the SDE tool? Or how many people have experience? All that stuff goes into formulating your plan so that way you have a plan that's specifically for your community. So these are all the different parts of the workshop. So it's a lot of things goes into the workshop, from the beginning to identify the communities all the way to you updating your substantial damage plan. There's a lot of different components that all works together, but the big thing is getting you guys into the workshop, identifying the communities. Are you going to be a beginner community? Are you going to be an experienced community? Because that will help us to facilitate the workshop. So that way, when you attend the workshop, you are with other communities that has the same capabilities, same resources, versus another community that may have a lot more experience. We want it to be engaging and we want it to be meaningful for all the participants who attend the workshop. So this is what the community will get from attending the workshop, and the experience you go through when you do attend the workshop, when Amy and I have officially organize it and we have sent out the invites. We're not there yet. This is just laying the foundation for what is to come in the near future. So then you have the SDAT plan. So this is what your plan will look like. So once you have gone through the workshop and you have started plugging in your information into the document is going to generate for you. So the good thing about the SDAT plan is that it's a document that's for the community. It's going to lay out the procedures, the steps, and then it's going to be a document that you could forever edit and update over time as your staff changes, as your regulations gets updated, you add new procedures, you gain more experience from different events, you'll be able to forever to update this document. So this is the end goal when you leave the workshop, is to work on finalizing your SDAT plan. So you will have kind of the draft plan. After you attend the workshop, you get feedback from us, you send it to us for us to provide feedback. Once you have plugged in all your information into it, once we provide you the feedback and you have addressed those feedbacks, then you'll be able to finalize your substantial damage administrative plan. And now you have a plan for doing substantial damage for your community that you could update over time. So that's the end goal, is to get to this point where you will have a substantial damage administrative plan for your community. Now, in terms of what Amy and I have to do. So there's a lot of work that Amy and I have to do along with Sonny before we could get to officially putting on those workshops for you guys, because it's a lot of work that we have to do behind the scenes. So the first step is we have to establish the plan, the requirements, and the timeline. Who's going to be involved? Because to do a workshop requires location, staffing, who's going to be there, because to have multiple communities in a workshop, we're going to need more staff than just Amy, myself, and Sonny. So we may have to reach out to other FEMA colleagues to support the workshop, because you want to be able to walk around and talk to everybody and have discussions, because the workshop is meant to be very interactive, very heavy discussion focused. Not too much PowerPoint, because we want it to be a conversation of us capturing what you were saying about your community, so that way you could put it into your draft plan. So we got to figure out who's going to attend, the location, the resources, plan out all the logistics. So there's a detailed SOP that's built internally that Amy and I would go through. Then we have to identify invite, and then screen the communities. So once we have figured out, okay, what is the dates for when we want to do this event, who's going to be able to support it from the FEMA and state side, then we have to invite you guys and send out the invitation and say, hey, are you interested in attending this workshop we're going to have, let's say, April 2024. So then we'll send out kind of a survey to try to get a gauge of how many communities we want to participate. And then we'll have to stream it down and say, hey, for this workshop, since it's the initial workshop, we only going to do 4 communities just to kind of get our feet wet, to figure all the bugs in the workshop before we kind of open it up to more communities. The overall goal is to be able to provide maybe a couple workshops every year so that way we try to get to as much of our communities as we can. There's 402 communities, so there's only one Amy, one Julius, one Sunny. So obviously we'll not be able to get to everybody, but the goal is over the coming years is to be able to work with our communities and get them a substantial damage plan so that you have something in place whenever event happens in your community. So once we have done the identification, the invite, screen out the communities to figure which track they're going to be put on. Are they going to be on the beginner track or are they going to be on the experience track? Then we're going to prepare for the workshop. So we got to go over the roles, responsibility, who's going to be responsible for teaching different sections, capturing the notes, preparing for it, getting the location. So all that stuff goes into it. Then we actually have to do the workshop, which is there comes everything that all the hard work, all the planning, all the processing comes into actually doing the workshop, because you're going to have technical assistance tables, you're going to have questions, you're going to be providing support. So it's a lot of information, it's a lot of on-ground activities in terms of at the workshop, what we're going to be doing, because we want it to be productive, we want it to be interactive, and we want you guys to walk away and say, hey, this workshop was a great workshop because we learned a lot, things that we may not have been doing or things we thought we're doing well, but obviously we need to improve on it, or hey, we have some gaps that we need to address because you never know when the next big event's going to happen. So then we do a post-workshop survey. We have you guys fill out. And then once you guys start working on your draft plan, you're going to send that back to us after you've completed the draft plan. You're going to send it back to us, and then we're going to review it and give you feedback and say, hey, have you considered this? Or hey, have you thought about this? Or hey, what you going to do about notifying property owners? Or hey, how are you going to do outreach to inform folks? Hey, with the NFIP program, this is what it means for my community. Hey, if we have an event, this is what substantial damage means. You know, so we're going to ask you those questions. So that way, once you are able to finalize your plan, all the questions and comments we have been addressed. So this is everything that Amy and I and Sonny have to do in order for us to have a successful workshop with you guys. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, so how do we identify communities? So there's 2 paths we're going to utilize to identify our communities for the workshop. So you're going to either FEMA state driven. So it's going to be based. So if it's FEMA state driven, we're going to look at your risk characteristics and history of the community to determine are you a good candidate for the workshop. So we're going to look at audits. So Amy and I do community assistance visits, better known as audits. So this is when we come out and assess your program, where we do a permit file review. We look at your regulations. We drive around the floodplain to identify development in your communities. We have a meeting to kind of just talk about roles and responsibility and what the community is supposed to be doing for floodplain compliance. Then have you had any recent events in your community and recent disaster declarations? And do you have gaps when it comes to substantial damage? So that will kind of help us to kind of, if we decide to go that route in terms of identifying communities. And also we have CRS communities. So being in CRS or 12 CRS communities, that's a community rating system, they get credit for having a substantial damage plan. So they will be a good candidate to help those communities, you know, improve their CRS ratings so they could get a higher discount for their residents in the community. So you have the FEMA driven track through the audit process, CRS process, disaster declarations. We've seen a lot of development in the community. Then we have the community driven track where it's like, hey Julius, hey Amy, I want to be part of this workshop, and you guys are reaching out to us and saying, hey, we want to be part of this workshop. So if there's an opportunity for us to attend this workshop, we want to be able to join the workshop. So there's two different tracks. You got a community-driven track where the community reaches out to participate, and then you have the FEMA state-driven route where we are identifying communities and reach out specifically to those communities based on the risk characteristics and history of that community. So this is how we'll be able to identify communities, because like I said, this is the first workshop we're going to be doing in Tennessee. So I know we're probably going to get a lot of interest, and it's going to be hard to kind of narrow down the communities, but the eventual goal is to offer this workshop as often as possible. So that way we could get out to the majority of our communities as best as we can. So workshop size. So this is where we're going to have to figure out the right amount of communities. It's going to take some time. So that's what I said. It's going to take us, I'd say, between Amy, myself, and Sonny, and any other FEMA or state folks, it's probably going to take us a couple months to kind of sit down and put the workshop, all the logistics in order. The reason why this is going to take some time is because since this is going to be the initial workshop, we got to figure out what is the appropriate amount of communities to have in the workshop. Is it better to start off with 4 communities or start off with 5 or 6 communities? What is the right amount of communities in order for the workshop to be successful? Because we want to make sure everyone is participating in the workshop. No community is being overlooked, or no community feels that they've been neglected at the workshop, that their input and their voice is not being heard. So we want to make sure we have the appropriate number for who could attend the workshop, and what is a good number, in order to have a productive workshop. And then the goal of it is to kind of get multiple communities at the same time. So instead of doing one community at a time, is to get multiple communities, but finding the right amount of communities for each workshop is going to be the challenge that Amy and I is going to have to figure out. But those are the things that we have to figure out internally. Capping the number of communities, so that way it's manageable. And like I said, initially, would recommend no more than 3 communities per facilitator. So basically, if there's myself, Amy, and Sonny who's doing the workshop, so you think about 3 communities per facilitator. So you're looking at, in that case, you would have 9 communities, because you want to be able to make sure that during the workshop, when we're walking around, we're talking to folks, people asking questions, we're able to provide the necessary support for you versus having, let's say, 12, 15 communities, and then it gets overwhelmed. We get overwhelmed, the communities get overwhelmed. So finding the appropriate number. And then for you guys to invite, you may have multiple staff attend the workshop. It may not just be you. You may invite your mayor, you may invite your building official, you may invite your planning, your zoning folks. So finding the right space to accommodate the community, the facilitators from the state and FEMA, and then any additional participants from the community who wants to be part of the workshop. So the right venue, the right space, in terms of breaking out everyone into groups when we have those group discussions. So it's a lot of logistics that goes behind us putting on a successful workshop. And then, do we do it in person? Do we do it virtually? So there's pros and cons, because depending on the communities that we identified, they may be so spread out in the state of Tennessee. Some may be in West Tennessee, some may be in Middle Tennessee, East Tennessee. So doing one in person may not be feasible. We may have to do it virtually. Virtual has pros and it has cons. If we do it virtually, you're able to see, kind of get a lot more people to attend. Hopefully more people could be engaged in the process, because now you could get more folks spread out and get more communities to participate. But then the downside to it, as we have seen in the last couple of years in the virtual environment, you can't get distracted, maybe less engaging because you're not having that in-person interaction, harder to get folks to participate because you want it to be an interactive workshop, because at the end of the day, the goal is for you to walk away with a draft substantial damage plan for your community. And then some communities may have technological limitations. You may have bad Wi-Fi connections. You may not have cameras on your laptop. So there may be different things that may pose different challenges in the virtual environment. In person, easier to build those relationships, get to walk around, interact with you guys, put a name to the face, know who we're dealing with, be able to support you guys because we're gonna have technical assistance tables built into the workshop. So it's easier to do that in person versus virtual, and be able to kind of hear from you guys and say, hey, Julius, this is a challenge that we have. Hey, we just don't have staff that's trained up in substantial damage. We have folks that's brand new to floodplain management. So we're able to kind of hear from you guys directly and take that into consideration as we help you guys draft your plan. The cons is that we don't have unlimited funds. There's only one Amy, there's only one Julius, there's only one Sunny, and we have 402 communities. So being able to travel with limited funds, that poses a challenge. And then finding the right venue, do we have a big enough space depending on how many people is going to come? And then the other thing that we have is if communities kind of attend in person because they don't have the funds to travel, they kind of leave the office, to go to the workshop. So there's different factors that Amy and I have to sit down and take all this stuff in considerations when we decide to do, whether we do it virtually or in person. And then, so this is what the screening and track assessment tool looks like. So we will send this out to folks and say, hey, put in your community name, go through and answer those questions for us. And this will kind of help us to figure out which track the community should go into in terms of what type of workshop we'll be doing. So once the community official fills this out, you fill out to the best of your knowledge. And then once we get it, it comes to us and we're able to go for it and do a scoring system. And based on the scoring system, we'll be able to either put you on the beginner track or the experience track. So the beginner track is a foundational minimum level of knowledge of substantial improvement, substantial damage, and maybe seeking basic substantial damage stuff. You're just brand new to floodplain management, you're brand new to substantial damage. You have supposed to be doing it, you just haven't been doing it, you're just unfamiliar, you kind of fall into the beginner track. Experience track is more of communities that has a lot more knowledge, more experience, and they're seeking additional guidance to enhance the existing procedures. So this is how we're able to separate communities into the experience versus the beginner track. And then, so this kind of walks us through the timeline from like what it would look like. So it will take almost like 6 months of planning. The goal is to try to get down from 6 months to hopefully 3 months of planning from start to finish. But being the first time we're offering this stuff, it will take some time. So that's why I said this workshop won't be done this year, but sometime next year. We're just laying the groundwork now. So once we start planning everything out and figuring out all the timelines and figuring out our invitations and getting everything out to the communities, we want to make sure that when we do this workshop, we have crossed every T, dot every I, and it's going to be successful. So that way we could continue doing the workshop in the coming years and continue to provide it annually, at least a couple of times, to our communities in Tennessee. And then you have phase 2. So this is the follow-up. So we're gonna need your participation during the workshop, before the workshop, and after the workshop, because we want to touch base with you again and say, hey, have you been implementing the plan? Is there any areas you're still struggling with, or you need to make changes in the future, or you had staff changes? Like, we're gonna do future monitoring and evaluation because we don't want you guys to just put the plan on the shelf and never look at it. We want to make sure that you guys are incorporating it into your daily operations, for your permitting process, for disaster times. We want to make sure that you guys are using it throughout the community, and not just whenever there is a federal disaster declaration, but whenever there's any event in the community as an opportunity to use the plan, go out there and make those assessments and determine are those buildings substantial damage or not. So the future monitoring, so this is just where Amy and I would just touch base with you guys, maybe during office hours, and maybe during a phone call, we may schedule a Zoom or Teams call and just touch base with you guys and just see how you guys are doing, what are your challenges, where you could improve on the plan. So it's just continual assistance, continual customer service to you guys. What we're doing right now, so like with office hours, a lot of you guys reach out because you have a question about the permitting process, or hey, I need some help on a letter of map amendment, or hey, there's a new development coming in my community, or it's in a floodway, what do I need to be doing? What should I be looking for in the review process? So the same thing in terms of us just touching base with you guys and just following up with you guys. Because like I said, we want it to be a collaborative relationship where you guys are reaching out to us for assistance. We provide assistance, and it's a team effort from the local, state, and the federal. And I'm a big advocate that everything starts and ends at the local level. Amy and I are here to support you guys with trainings, with workshops, with technical assistance, with the audit process. But at the end of the day, it's the local official that has to administer the floodplain regulations and ensure all development is done in compliance with the NFIP program. So the other thing I want to bring up to you guys' attention is Disaster Recovery Reform Act 1206. The reason why I'm bringing this up and tying it into the SDOT workshop is because now, for the first time, if there's a federal declared disaster in your community, so if there's an event, you have a flooding, a hurricane, or an earthquake in your community, and it's been federally declared by the federal government, so that means the president signs off a disaster declaration, like I showed you guys with the disaster, I think 1909 and back in 2010, and 4609 in Waverly 2 years ago. That was federally declared. So be it federally declared, federal funds become available. Now, for the first time now on the DR 1206, communities will get reimbursed for doing substantial damage. So this is a big, in my opinion, big game changer for local officials whenever there is a federal declared disaster, because now communities will get reimbursed for doing substantial damage. So on the DR 1206, Code Administration and Enforcement amended sections 402 and 406 of the Stafford Act. So section 402 will provide assistance to state and local governments for building, code, and floodplain administration and enforcement, including inspections for substantial damage compliance. Section 406 will provide for base and overtime wages for extra hires, facilitate implementation and then enforcement of adopted building codes for a period of no more than 180 days after major disaster declaration is declared. So if you have to hire additional staff, you have to work overtime to do floodplain compliance, the permitting process, substantial damage assessments, communities will be reimbursed for doing substantial damage, for doing floodplain compliance. So to me, that's a game changer now for communities moving forward, because in the past, one thing I heard a lot from communities respond to disasters like, hey, Julius, we just don't have the resources, we don't have the training, we don't have the capacity to go out there and assess those buildings. So now on the 1206 with a disaster declaration, communities know whether they have to hire additional staff, hire a contractor, or work extra hours to do all these things. They will now be reimbursed on the public assistance for during substantial damage. So there's a policy. So if you click on, I'll send you guys a copy of this, but if you click on the policy, it kind of goes into more details of what it is. So this kind of gives you a summary of DR, the resources for state, local, tribal, and territorial government. So it authorized FEMA to provide SDLs with resources needed to effectively administer and enforce adopted building codes and floodplain ordinances. So building code administration. So if you have to review and process building application, collect fees, hire, train, supervise staff, all that stuff will be covered under building code administration. Code enforcement. So you have to inspect structures, review elevation certificates to ensure that structures are rebuilt in compliance, conduct and process condemnation determinations. All that stuff falls under 1206 code enforcement. Floodplain management, regulation, administration, and enforcement. So if you have to hire, train, supervise staff, provide training, process permits, all that stuff will be covered now on the 1206. And then the last big component is substantial damage operations, conducting your field service, preparing your cost information, preparing your inspections. All these things now will help communities now rebuild and respond and be better suited to respond to events in your community. But remember, 1206 only applies when there's a federal declared disaster in your community. If you don't have a federal declared disasters, 1206 is not available. You still have to go out there and do substantial damage. So it's regardless of whether it's declared or not declared, you still have to go out there and do substantial damage. It's just that now, for the first time since 2020, communities now will be able to go out there and do substantial damage and get reimbursed. I'm pointing out the city of Waverly, 4609. So shout out to Larry and the city of Waverly. They were one of the first communities in Region 4. So Region 4 has 8 states, including Tennessee. And the city of Waverly was the first community to participate in 1206. They got a FEMA grant for $4,500 because the city had to hire additional staff to assist Larry with the substantial damage assessments and the determinations and the permitting process. So there was a news release on it, how FEMA, through the 1206 process, the city of Waverly was able to take advantage of 1206. So moving forward, if you have a disaster declaration in your community, 1206 is a game changer for communities now to go out there and do code enforcement, do floodplain compliance, to do substantial damage. So guess what? Having a substantial damage plan, so now when you do have an event, whether it's declared or not, you already have procedures in place and say, hey, we already know if there's a disaster declaration and it's federal declared, we already know that we're gonna get reimbursed. Once we submit for reimbursement, no more than 180 days after the event, we get reimbursed, but we already have a procedure in place and say, hey, well, we need to get additional staff. Well, hey, we know how many structures we have to go assess for. We already know all those things because guess what? You have it written in your plan for how you're going to respond to those events in your community and how you're going to go out there and make those determinations and notify property owners that, hey, your building is or not substantially damaged. So what's next for SDAT? So once Amy and I get together over the next couple of months, we'll be starting to get a list of communities. So we'll probably reaching out to you guys maybe towards the end of the year, or early next year to try to get an engagement for which communities would be interested in it. So that way we could start figuring out the location, the time, the date for the event, whether we're going to do a beginner workshop or we're going to experience workshop. That will all depend on what communities we select for the initial workshop. We have to provide some training. So FEMA Region 4 office will be training not just Amy, but all the state NFIP coordinators in terms of how to facilitate this workshop. So in that way, we have multiple facilitators, not just FEMA, but Amy being trained on it, Sonny being trained on it, and be able to execute this workshop because it's going to be a joint workshop between FEMA and the state. And then if Amy ever wants to do the workshop by herself, aka she don't want Julius around, she could do it by herself because she and Sonny will be trained in terms of how to facilitate it. But knowing Amy, I know she probably would want to do it in conjunction with me. So I don't think she wants to get rid of her, what she call a BFF, best floodplain friend. So I know it will be a team effort because we work very closely together. It's a really good partnership between FEMA and the state NFIP office. So once we get together, Amy and I and Sonny and any additional folks at FEMA, we kind of get together to start laying out the planning and the coordination in order for us to kind of roll out the workshop to you guys in Tennessee. So it's going to take some time. So this is not something that's going to happen overnight. This is not going to happen in a couple months. This is going to take some time for us to execute the workshop. But we just want you guys to kind of know what's coming down the pipeline. When I came to Tennessee about a year and a half ago, I told Amy, my big thing is being proactive, whether it's with the Tennessee permitting guide that we have sent you guys, whether that with the workshops, with trainings. My goal is to continue to kind of move floodplain management along in Tennessee and for us to be a lot more proactive versus reactive because we just never know when the event's going to happen. It could happen tomorrow. We saw what happened in Waverly in 2011. We saw what happened in the Nashville and the surrounding areas back in 2010. So we've seen these events happen quite more frequent now. So we want to make sure that you guys are ready. So when something does happen, you know, you're more resilient to bounce back a lot faster versus trying to figure out what do we do now that the event has happened. Now, is there any questions? And as I mentioned, I will go more into details at the conference in August, but I just want to kind of give you guys kind of a heads up in terms of what's coming down the pipeline in terms of workshops and substantial damage for Tennessee. Any questions, anything in the chat, Amy, or anyone wants to mute themselves?
That has been quiet. I did have someone text me to say, hey, I'm interested and working with you guys on this plan. So we'll be working on it in the future. We will be collecting. I'm excited for this opportunity because I think, again, being proactive, having good customer service, and then making sure that everybody has a plan in place is really important. So, and again, we have the best in the business here giving us a, it's true, giving us training in Tennessee. So we're really blessed to have Julius. You are my BFF. You're not leaving anytime soon. We have agreement. So the band is still going to be together for a while. So again, we look forward to working with every community that wants us to assist them in this. And again, everybody give Julius a round of applause, like, with your little reaction on here to say thank you.
Now you good, Amy. I've been doing this for a number of years now, so I was kind of in my previous role, we kind of wrote the blueprint for this workshop. So I have a ton of experience to doing this workshop. So I'm excited to bring all my knowledge and experience to you guys in Tennessee and the state NFIP office. So definitely take advantage of the opportunity, to participate. And we'll be reaching out as Amy and I and Sonny plan this stuff out. So, if you don't hear from us the next couple months, don't be alarmed. We haven't forgotten about you guys. It's just going to take some time to plan it out because we want it to be a successful workshop. And we want you guys to walk away from it feeling like, hey, I understand substantial damage. I have a plan in place. I know what to do, so that way, when something does happen in your community, you're not panicking, you're not throwing your hands up. You're like, yes, I am confident. I know what to do. I have the resources. I have a plan in place. I just have to execute it. And if I need help, I know I can reach out to Amy, I can reach out to Julius for assistance. So.
Hey, Julius, I have one question. That grant after federal disaster, is it 45? Is that the set amount or is it vary?
Which one, Sonny? Can you repeat that?
After federal disaster is declared, you said that Waverly received a $4,500 grant.
Yeah, that
varies from community.
Yeah, it varies based on your community, whatever you submit for reimbursement. So every community is gonna be different, depending on whatever your cost was that you submit for reimbursement on. So every community is gonna be different. So Waverly was just 4,500 because I'm assuming that was what they submitted for maybe the wages for the additional staff they had to hire to help with substantial damage compliance aspect of it. Another community may have a higher funding grant versus Waverly. So it's going to depend on the disaster and what that community asks for reimbursement through public assistance. So every community is going to be different. So that's a good observation, Sonny, and good question. So guys, if you do get a disaster declaration and it's federally declared, more likely majority of our disasters that get declared includes public assistance, because public assistance is for your roads, your bridges, your culverts, your public facilities. So more likely, if you have public assistance, guess what? 1206 is available for your community. So just going out there and do those assessments, hiring additional staff, whatever your cost is for doing floodplain compliance, substantial damage, you will submit that to public assistance to get reimbursed for it. So it will vary based on your community and what you submit for reimbursement. But you have 6 months from the date of the disaster declaration to submit for reimbursement.
Does anybody else have a question?
All right, yeah, no, guys, I will see you guys in August. I'm gonna go more into details about this as well, and then I'll be there in person as well, so you guys get to pick my brain, ask all your questions. I know some of you guys, I'm working on substantial damage plans with you guys as part of your community assistance visit. So, so I'll definitely be reaching out to you guys individually for the communities that's doing a substantial damage plan outside of the workshop. So. And if you do need to have a substantial damage plan, you don't have to wait for the workshop to do a plan. You can reach out to Amy and I at any time. We'll sit down with you guys and walk you guys through it. I do have sample documents as well that's already tailor-made for communities to write a plan. So don't think about, hey, we have to wait for the workshop. You can reach out at any time, or if we're doing an audit. I have been putting in for communities as a corrective action to create substantial damage plans. Because like I said, there's 402 communities in Tennessee, so obviously you do the math, it's never gonna be possible for us to get every community in the workshop. So individually, if you say, hey, Jules, we need a plan, I don't wanna wait, months to be able to get into the workshop, we could start working individually to help you draft a plan as well too. So there's multiple options, but the workshop is just be able to get multiple communities at the same time instead of doing it one by one. So yeah, you guys have my contact information. So email, phone. Email always works best because sometimes I don't have service when I'm traveling or if I'm out of the office. And then if it's in the email, definitely it's in my inbox. So if you have sent me an email recently and I haven't got back to you on anything, my sincere apologies. I have been traveling a lot lately for trainings. Actually, I'm in a training this week. But definitely send me an email. My goal is to play catch up on emails this coming week, next week, to respond back to you. So if you have sent me an email or anything and I haven't responded back, my sincere apologies. I will get back to you guys as soon as I can. And then you have Amy's contact information as well too. So, and then we have office